For the last 6 years or so, been with a company that provides wealth management from a biblical foundation. So I am every day working with clients on all the practical elements of financial planning with a scriptural foundation as the basis. So we mentioned the Kingdom Advisor. That's something that is central to what we do at Blue as well. So Blake mentioned a lot of people find it very uncomfortable to talk about money. I do not, because I do it all day, every day. So it's a little bit sometimes like, I guess, being a doctor in that, certain things that may be uncomfortable for some people are just totally normal for me. So I'm hoping to bring a little bit of that to this conversation. My goal over the next few weeks, first, I want to set the framework for a scriptural perspective on money, wealth, and possessions. Oh, yep, you were gonna go. Okay, falls asleep fast. And then also really dig into some of the practical applications of the perspective. So, like Blake mentioned, you have the little piece of paper on your table. If there are specific areas that you are interested in touching on over the next couple of weeks, would love to know that. And I also want today and each class to be a conversation. So questions and comments are welcome. Today we're going to focus more on the theological scriptural principles of stewardship that underlie all the practical applications that we're going to look at the next couple of weeks. So over those couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at some really practical steps that we can all take to make progress in our stewardship journey. I think of stewardship as a journey, and we're going to look at that a little bit on one of these slides as well. It's an element of sanctification. It's part of sanctification. We start at a particular place and we make progress through the Lord's help and guidance. So I'll probably use that word journey a number of times talking about stewardship. That's what I mean. I'm talking about that sanctification process that the Lord works out in our lives. My hope is this class will be as helpful as possible, setting that biblical foundation as well as those practical applications of scriptural wisdom. I'll pause for questions a few times as I go through my presentation, but definitely, hopefully at the end we'll have some time as well for questions and conversation, and definitely feel free to speak up. I definitely want this to be a conversation, not a lecture. Yeah.
I guess one just quick question, just in general. Mm-hmm. Seems like we spent a lot of time this morning already on how it's hard to talk about money and it's embarrassing, or uncomfortable. Like, as Christians, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I know that's a really good question. Yeah.
Because that's the thing. I'm like, should it be that uncomfortable? I mean, in a sense of like, God gives us what we have. We invest for His glory. Yeah. There's no, condemnation in Christ.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I've thought about it a lot over the years, and I think a lot of it is part of our culture in America. Because I've known people who with different cultural backgrounds who didn't seem to have the same discomfort. And I've observed that and thought, I think as Americans, we're just raised to feel like this isn't a topic for polite company on some level. And I think as we'll see, there's a lot of pitfalls involved with money, obviously. Like Blake mentioned, Jesus talks about it a lot, and He does that because He knows it's important to us, and there's a lot of pitfalls. So I think that's an element as well. But I do agree that coming at it from a scriptural perspective, from a perspective of stewardship, should take a lot of that away.
Yeah. If we're in that spot, maybe we should be challenging ourselves a bit on why we feel.
Well, I totally agree. I mean, like I said, I talk about it all day, every day. And I think it's actually really freeing. And it's just definitely a thing that I say to my clients, because a lot of times someone will come in and they've got a lot of shame around, like, here's where I am. And it's like, oh, I'm so embarrassed to say this. This is a shame-free zone. We're not coming at it from that attitude. So I agree. And I think that's a great thing to explore a little bit more. So you hear the word stewardship. It was in kind of the promotional description of this class. So what comes to mind when you hear the word stewardship for you guys? Anything specific?
Mm-hmm. Using stuff wisely.
Okay, so there's a wisdom element and there's a sort of using something as a tool element. Yeah. Anything else?
We are not really the owner.
Okay, yep. Ultimately, we're not the owner.
What do you say?
We're not ultimately the owner.
I think there's like a responsibility aspect of
Yeah.
it.
For sure. Yeah, it kind of goes along with if we're not the owner, then why are we, in charge of it at all? And there's a responsibility there.
The parable of the talents.
Yeah. We're gonna focus on talents, the parable of the talents today, actually. So yes, that's probably Jesus's most famous parable about stewardship. Certainly not the only one where the element comes up, but yeah. So we're actually gonna dig into that today. A couple years ago, when I was studying for my certified financial planner exam, I was in a study group with 3 other local people, 2 of whom were not Christian, and we met every week and got to know each other really well. We're actually still all friends. We still get together every couple months just to maintain those connections. But one of the guys that asked me at one point, he's like, okay, so you work for a Christian wealth management company, right? I said, yeah. He's like, so you're a Christian? And I said, yeah. That's central to what we do. And he says, so how is that different from my company, right? From another financial planning firm? And it was a really interesting question because on some level it's not. We're all studying for this test together. We all passed the test. We all got certified. We're doing the same practical hands-on type of application stuff, but the mindset's totally different. And that was, I realized, potentially a little challenging to explain to someone who did not come from a Christian background, not really familiar with the faith, but he was honestly curious. And so, of course, I couldn't say, oh, well, we come, our foundational mentality is the idea of stewardship, because he's going to be like, well, that's Christianese, and I don't know what you're talking about still. So, I had to try to think of how to describe this for someone who was not at all coming from a faith background. And I guess that's kind of, as we go through these principles that we get out of the parable of the talents, that's actually something I'd like to pose to you guys to maybe think about. How would I say a Christian attitude towards finances is different to someone who isn't a church member, doesn't have a faith background? Because it can be easy to just kind of throw the word stewardship out there and not really have a very strong internalized sense of what that means. It's a little bit of a shortcut. Honestly, it can be for us. So as we go through these stewardship principles and this talking about this idea of God owns it all and the responsibility and all that, some of these things that you guys have mentioned, how does this affect our day-to-day financial lives in a practical way? That's a question that I'd like us all to consider. What would you say to that person who asked you a similar question to the question that I was faced with? So in church circles, stewardship sometimes becomes, and I know this is definitely, like Blake said, something we're going to avoid here, but it can often be code for giving money. It's like, oh, the pastor's going to preach about stewardship, we must have a budget shortfall, people are going to make these assumptions. But stewardship is much more than giving money. Obviously, generosity is an element, but it's only one of the sort of outflows of the stewardship mentality. That's not what's going on here. This is a much bigger picture. So as we get into the parable of the talents, and we look at these 6 principles that we can learn from it about stewardship, and then that can kind of underlay everything else that we're going to talk about. Let's just consider for a minute before we do that, though, the world's attitude towards money and finances, because we're all surrounded by that. We're immersed by that, of course, so it's going to have influence for us. Sometimes it's going to need to be something that we consciously combat. Sometimes it's just going to need to be something we're aware of because we have a different perspective. it's impossible to look at the news with these days without hearing advice on how to handle your finances. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's, come to this seminar and learn about how you're going to make millions, investing in this whatever. Sometimes it's more subtle. It's more along the lines of, follow these simple steps and you'll achieve happiness, or you'll achieve freedom somehow financially, right? So we see it all around us, and then even in just societal and cultural attitudes, like you're mentioning, with this sort of sense of shame or privacy around money that may not be entirely healthy. I think it's just something we need to be aware of and attuned to, so that we can be wise and judicious about our own approach. So what are some of the things, if you had to say some of the world's messages around money that would come to mind? Cultural.
He was most gold winners.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, for sure. Sometimes literally, or like right now, but yeah, in general, right. Yeah, accumulation. He who dies with the most toys wins, which sounds really silly when you say it that way, but it's definitely a very common one. Yeah, anything else?
I think that it points to selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, accumulating stuff for me.
Yeah.
Or my people, my family.
Yeah, so a sort of selfish perspective, whether it's just for me personally, or maybe my small little family group, or my friend group, or what have you, but no larger vision. Mm-hmm.
It's for living life like to the fullest.
Oh yeah,
end, basically.
Yeah. Like you earn money and so that you can party on. Yeah, right.
Yeah, money equals happiness.
Yeah.
I think there's also those who like donate their fortunes to charity or something like that. They're like, you know what I mean? Like your money is great in somebody else's hands.
Yeah. So like maybe you get really, really rich and then you can leave it all to
Or
foundation.
if you accidentally become rich and then you give it to people that need it, versus I did all this work to do, that kind of stuff.
Money also can equal security.
Yeah. It's viewed as the way to actually be secure, to take control of your future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really good. Anything else?
I think people have an attitude of like, I earned it, I deserve to spend it how I want on myself.
Yeah. This is mine, I worked hard for this, now I get to decide what I'm going to do with it. No strings attached, basically, yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. So we'll see, are we going to work here?
Do you need someone to drive? I can sit there.
Well, it was working, but now maybe it turned off. I'm, no. Well, uh-oh. There we go. Okay. So this is just a summary, and I think some of what you guys have said fits very well into here. We've got work hard, play hard, like Graceland said, the accumulation attitude, right, where who dies with the most stuff wins. No one mentioned debt, but I think that's a really common one, is sort of the idea of like, well, even if you can't afford it now, you can still have it and pay it off later. Work to retire, this is kind of an interesting one. Retirement is only mentioned one time in the Bible. Doesn't mean that it's an evil concept, but it's not really a scriptural concept. But in our culture, there's this really strong focus on, work really, really hard, and then like maybe you can retire early, oh boy, and then you can do whatever you want, So the point of work is to just accumulate enough to retire. Bigger is better, I guess it's just the idea of, kind of maybe display of wealth. Bigger house, fancier car, all of those kind of things are sort of viewed as like, oh, you've made it now. So, we've got the verse from Romans 12 up here about do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So, some of these things may just be antithetical or contrary to a scriptural perspective on stewardship. Some of them may be not necessarily always bad, but something that we have to view through the lens of stewardship and view with, have a redemptive or redeemed mindset on them. Some of these things are even kind of contradictory too, because, accumulation of money versus the going and buying a fancier car or whatever, those two don't necessarily go together, I guess, unless you do the debt version of it. But there's a lot of contradiction amongst these different messages that we get from the world too. So this is the point of this class. The Bible has a lot to say about money. Jesus has a lot to say about money. And the wisdom that's in God's Word can help us to sort through all these messages that we're getting from society around us. Anyone want to take a stab at how many Bible verses you think there are about money, wealth, and possessions?
Lots.
300.
More than 300.
More than 300.
70 times 70.
500.
All right, let's see if my clicker will work. Oh, yeah, there we go. 2,350.
Wow.
So 2,000 more than dealing with money, wealth, and possessions throughout the Bible. If you start to think about all the famous passages that you know of that are about it, and then you start to think about how many, probably especially in the Old Testament, that you maybe have never read or once read 10 years ago are also about it, it's quite a lot. 15% of everything that Jesus said was about money. He talked about money more than he talked about heaven and hell, more than he talked about prayer, more than any other topic. And almost 30% of his parables deal with financial topics. And I think this is because, as Jesus said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. He knew that our attitude towards wealth affects everything. And it's also central to who we are. Our perspective on treasure is where is our heart's posture. And not just towards money, but towards all of reality. So I also think of the parable of the sower, where I know we had a sermon on that just a few weeks ago, where the deceitfulness of riches is one of the things that makes faith unfruitful, right? So Jesus was fully aware of this, and he knew that having a disordered perspective on wealth can sabotage us, sabotage our faith. So that's, I believe, why he talked about it so much. This verse is really interesting. This reminds me of a comment made just a few minutes ago. Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter as money is a shelter, but the advantage of knowledge is wisdom preserves those who have it. So the writer of Ecclesiastes is basically comparing money and wisdom, and he's saying people try to use money the same way that we're to use wisdom, which is as a foundation for life's choices, as a way of being safe. And the difference is that money can't actually make us safe. And it's not a good ultimate foundation for life's choices the way that wisdom is. So, wisdom and money are both shelters, but wisdom preserves those who have it. Whereas money, as we all know, practically speaking, does not preserve those who have it. So the verse doesn't say an inheritance is bad, right? Money is a good thing, just as wisdom is, but the money can't ultimately save us and preserve us, keep us safe. So in thinking eternally about temporal wealth, it's key to recognize temporal wealth is fleeting, and also, therefore, we need to have an eternal perspective on it. Again, it doesn't mean it's bad, but it's not permanent, and we have to view it from an eternal perspective. So if it's not permanent, then what's it for? Why does God give us money? It's not a trick question.
To live our lives.
Okay, yeah, all right. To pay our bills, yeah, okay. Yep, definitely true.
I mean, I'm going to give the Jesus God Bible answer. To help lead people to salvation.
Okay, yeah. Anything else?
We're social beings, we live in communities, it facilitates like living amongst people, trade, commerce, all those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can be used to bring about God's kingdom.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it can be used. Yeah, I like what you guys are saying, because this is it fits right in with. We like to say to our clients sometimes that God gives us money for three. And it does three things for us. It's a tool, a test, and a testimony. So a tool would just be living life. To live in the world that we're in, we need it in order to pay our bills. We need it to, do things like buy food and keep a roof over our head, all of that. A test, there's an element of that in the parable of the talents that we're about to read, right? And a testimony, because if we act wisely with it, it's a way of displaying our faith and bringing others to have interest in understanding better why we live that way. And yes?
I wonder too if the test part, if the founding fathers kind of knew that, because you wonder like, why did they put on money in God we trust?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's maybe just to remind us, like it isn't money that we trust in.
Yeah.
That it's a test. Like, how do we look at this?
Yeah.
So.
No, that's really good, because that ties back in with the verse from Ecclesiastes about an inheritance and wisdom are both a good thing, but only one can preserve us. Yeah. No, I like that a lot. That's a good point. I'm going to file that one away for talking with clients. Just a reminder. Okay, so to start taking a look at Parable of the Talents and running through these lessons from it, I'd love it if someone would read. Does anyone have a Bible available on your phone, or a physical one that you'd like to read? It's in Matthew 25, starts at verse 14. Who'd like to read?
Who can get there first?
Yeah, who can get there first?
I'm there if it
Okay,
helps.
go ahead.
Okay. For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. And so I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have scattered no seed? Then you ought to have vested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
All right, thank you. So the first lesson that we gather from this parable is maybe the most foundational and obvious one in some ways, that we're not the owners, right? Throughout the story, you hear that terminology of this is what the steward did with his master's money, right? Just a few verses here, few out of very, very many, but selected from throughout the scripture, just to remind us. From Genesis 1:1, Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it, for he founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. So we've got that, God created heavens and the earth, and then we have this reminder in Psalm 24, well, because God made it, it's all his. That's the logical conclusion to that. And then in 1 Timothy, this is one of my firm's verses. 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19 is our company verse, saying not to set our hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. So he gives us everything to enjoy, and that's why we set our hopes on him as opposed to on those riches. So really these Bible verses give us there's no doubt in our minds about that we're not the owners of our stuff. Even no matter whose name's on the title deed of the house or the car, or whose name's on the paycheck. So if we're not owners, if we're stewards, then the question is, well, what is a steward? What's a steward's job?
To grow what's been given.
In the parable, it's certainly, it's sort of that abundance mentality, to use a kind of common phrase of this day and age. But to take what God has granted us and manage it, actively manage it. Yeah. What else? What's a steward more generally? Like not just about money, but just in general, big picture definition of the word.
Taking care of something.
Taking care of something, yeah.
It's like a manager.
Yeah, a manager, caretaker, someone who has a job that involves caring for someone else's possessions, right? So all of the things that we have to enjoy here on this earth, of which there are countless, are given by God to us to manage for the time we're here. So we're caretakers of God's assets. This slide, I think this is part of what I was referencing earlier about the idea of sanctification as part of the stewardship journey. I really like this. You don't have to share where you see yourself on the progression here. It kind of goes across and then across again. But, I would encourage you to consider, we've got going from self-absorbed owner, where it's 100% mine. I think that's generally the world's mindset. Some people, though, I do think, even who aren't people of faith, still kind of ease into that obligated owner. Well, I have full authority over my belongings, but I feel obligated to give something, right? Like you were saying, like the idea of, I've made it, I'm rich, I'm gonna, start a private foundation or whatever for the ultra wealthy, but also even for maybe people who we wouldn't consider ultra wealthy. I think there's some sense of obligation in some elements of our culture. And then we move to obedient owner, where this person might be thinking, okay, 10% is God's, the other 90% is mine. That sort of, God mentions 10% plenty of times, so I'll kind of let go of that and give that to him, but the rest is mine. Obedient steward, now, the interesting thing about the contrast between owner and steward in the obedient side is obedient steward doesn't necessarily mean I give 100% of my wealth to the Lord. It has for a few people over the course of history. I always think of St. Francis and some of those other medieval Christians who really felt that the Lord was saying, give me literally everything you own. and they did that. But he doesn't, the Lord doesn't say that to everyone. But the obedient steward is aware that everything that they have is actually the Lord's, and he's just granted it to us for a season. I think back through my own history and progression along this. When I was a kid, I was a very meticulous, scrupulous personality, and that included with tithing. So literally, if I found a dime in the parking lot, I was like, okay, I got to go home and find a penny, and I can put that in the offering plate. This is when I was like 6. I was just like, but unfortunately, again, I was 6. I'd like to think I've progressed a little bit since then, but I'm still on this journey myself, for sure. But at that age, it was this. I had this sense of fear, like, if I don't go find that penny and put it in the offering plate next Sunday, God's gonna smite me. I don't want to risk it. And so it was not coming from a place of joy, let's just say, in terms of having that view. I have since learned a lot about the joy that comes with recognizing God's ownership and recognizing the blessings of that. However, it's certainly still a work in progress for me as well. And I run into this all the time, just in my own experience. Something comes up, I have to remind myself, well, that's not actually mine. It's actually the Lord's, and He's in charge, and He can decide what to give me or what to take away. This one was also mentioned as a lesson from the parable, which is great. Obviously, we don't get to do anything we want with stuff that's not ours. Owners have rights. They can do what they want with their own stuff. Stewards have responsibilities. Everyone to whom much is given, of him much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand more. So similar to what's in the parable in Matthew. If the Lord grants us a lot, He's going to expect a lot. And this is actually an interesting thing too. Another interesting thing about the parable. What do you think that Jesus is illustrating when he says the master gave 5 to 1, 2 to 1, and 1 to the third?
Not everyone starts off with the same pool of resources.
Yeah. Yeah, so we don't all, this may be acknowledging something that's uncomfortable in our society, but it's also very obvious. Not everyone has the same resources that they're entrusted with. What else?
Well, and it wasn't about worth. I think that's, as Americans, that's what we see. Oh, you're rich, you must be, you're important or smart or whatever.
Yeah.
It was ability. It was like, this person is going to be a good steward, so I'm going to give them more so they can achieve more. Versus this one isn't as good, so I'm going to give them less. Mm-hmm. It was more like just talents and abilities than it was worth.
Right.
Or deserving anything.
Yeah, right. That's really key. It does say explicitly, there's the phrase in there, according to his ability. Right. So I think that's really important. I think it's easy to miss in the overall arc of the story, that little phrase where Jesus says that the master entrusted different amounts based on what they were able to handle. I think that's really important because it's easy, I don't know about you guys, but certainly easy for me to, look around and see others who are entrusted with a whole lot more and think, well, I think I could probably do a pretty good job with that too. But, Jesus knows better than we do what we can handle. And it's not just in terms of amounts, but it's in terms of the complexity of the gifts that he's given, the potential for abuse of those gifts, right? That maybe the one who was entrusted with 2, if he'd been entrusted with 5, it would have just pushed him over to the edge into pride or into anxiety or into fear, all of these different things that could have overthrown his stewardship journey. So for whatever reason, the Lord knew. Mm-hmm.
Should Christians then not seek to be greater stewards of things and just kind of let whatever comes to them come to them?
Is this a trick question?
Yes.
Well, I think so. The interesting thing about that is that money and financial resources is just one of the things that we're given, right? So, the parable is about money because maybe that's the most practical, hands-on way to illustrate it. But of course, the Lord doesn't just give us each amount of money. He gives us each talents and skills and abilities and time and family situations and location and all of these other things that we can then steward too. And part of the stewarding of that is probably producing more financial resources. Like in the parable, the individuals who are investing, they're producing more through that investment, but we could think of it as they're producing through using the other gifts that the Lord gave them. So being entrusted with different gifts, and again, not just financial, but this applies to intellect, family background, relationships, all of those things, right? The Lord entrusts each of us with different ones of those, and they're all gifts that we need to use in His service, but also we're warned against coveting what others have. And again, this isn't just financial, this is around all elements of what the Lord grants us. So a few of these verses here also give an idea of some of the pitfalls of comparing with others, right? Getting distracted by not just coveting, but I think it can also, another way I think of in terms of how it's easy to get distracted by what the Lord has granted others is by judging how well they're stewarding it, right? It's kind of easy to take a look at how someone else is managing what the Lord has granted them and just kind of think, well, they're not doing a great job, instead of focusing on our job. So recognizing the Lord's intentionality around how much He gives to each one is judged by the master, not on the basis of how much he was granted, but on how he handled the job. And this is the fourth lesson here. We will be held accountable, and this one's obviously not super comfortable for us to think about, but there at the end of the parable, it's very clear. The one that failed in his responsibility was judged. And in Romans 14:12, then each of us will give an account of himself to God. So, and this is, again, not just for money, but everything He's given us. Time, intellect, abilities of all types. So, with all of that in mind, it's important for us to recognize we need to be good managers of those good gifts. And it's important that we start doing it now, not later. It can be easy to think, okay, like later on when I've accumulated more, or when I've retired, or when I have more time to think about it. But we can't wait. We have to start now. The foolish steward was disrespectful of his master and kind of disregarded. He was a bit scornful even in his attitude towards his master, and he was held accountable for that. But on the other hand, we also see God will reward wise stewardship. That's also really clear in the parable. So I know we all want to hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant. And the master recognized the good stewardship that those ones had shown. Sometimes this reward from the Lord comes on earth. Sometimes it, or not exclusively on earth, but sort of like a down payment of it can come on this earth. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's only an eternal reward in heaven. But either way, we know that the Lord will reward wise stewardship. That verse from Colossians. Again, this one doesn't really particularly sound like it's talking about money. It's more talking about time and abilities. But whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. It's interesting because I think that verse, a lot of times we hear verse 23 without verse 24, saying to work out what you do with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men, which is good. But if we stop there, we miss the part where there's that promise of the inheritance from the Lord, which I think is also really important. So the last one, this one I would say is less in the parable than just throughout the rest of the Bible, as well as being kind of obvious one. We need help. Like with all elements of sanctification, it's not something we can do on our own. The Lord knows our weaknesses. He knows that we need help. He doesn't expect us to do this by ourselves. And this is the point of this class, right? These verses tell us wisdom is attainable. It's something that we need to seek after, and it's something the Lord commands us to seek after, but it's available. Most of us do not instinctively know how to be good stewards, financially or otherwise. We need guidance and good input. And so where do we go to get that? Well, the Holy Spirit works in our lives with that sanctification journey, like I said. The scripture has so many verses, over 2,000, well over 2,000 that talk about this topic. Wise counsel from godly men and women in the church. Learning from our mistakes is a way to make progress, and we've all done that, and we can share about that over the next couple of weeks as well in this class, and education, reading a book or a website on financial management, on stewardship, and continuing to attend this class. So with that, there's the 6 principles, and I'd love to hear any questions that you guys have, or just comments, input, thoughts.
I was just thinking, we probably have attracted like all fairly good stewards to this class already. Like I feel like
Oh, shucks.
Both our church tradition as well as the people that are interested in coming to a stewardship class probably are already, sanctified to some degree on these steps. And I know I myself have realized that I'm like a saver. I'm not a spender, I'm a saver. I'm sure there's a lot of people in here that are in that same boat. So yeah, I guess I'm just curious, like in the coming weeks, like, how do we challenge people that are savers, maybe already good stewards?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, is being a saver a good steward?
It can be. I'm definitely,
because there's definitely a pitfall on that in the parable, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I resonate with that.
Yeah.
The guy who screwed up.
Yeah. No, I think that's an interesting thing, because a lot of times, and again, I think this comes back to sort of maybe superficial Christian attitudes towards stewardship, because I'm a saver as well. Well, I guess I wouldn't say I'm a saver. I've done some, surveys and stuff about this myself, and I would say my area of temptation is to look at savings as safety, as a safety net, and get a little bit too fixated on that. So it's not that I love packing it away. I actually like spending, but I also don't feel safe unless I have a certain amount saved up, And so I think I don't think that necessarily equates to good stewardship, though. It can, but it doesn't always. There have certainly been lots of clients that I've challenged hey, you need to like stop saving, start spending this, start giving this away, start, you know, I'd love to see you go spend $50,000 on a big family vacation so that you can invest in your family, you know, things like that. So for everyone, it's you know, sometimes I think, and I know this is true for me, we can get distracted by, oh, I've got a really healthy savings account and I don't use a bunch of debt, and then think, oh, it means I'm a good steward. So, yeah.
I think also, I wonder if in the parable of the talents, it seemed like the motivation of the wise stewards was like they wanted to grow it. It was like a positive one. It was like love and service. Mm-hmm. And then the motivation of the one with the one talent was fear.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, like with some of the way we use money, how much we use fear.
Yeah.
Fear of missing out, fear of like being in trouble. And I'm with you, like that's how I've typically done it. I tell my wife we're kind of hoarders, you know, in the sense like we just keep it all for ourselves, it doesn't get used.
Yeah.
So, and maybe it's good to have a little bit of fear, like I don't want to be the one talent person, but maybe that's the area of growth is how can we push past that fear and really use it?
Yeah.
So what would be, like so for that one person, you're like, hey, I'd love to see you spend this. Like, how do you motivate someone or maybe like encourage them to do that? Like in your job, but what would you say to people who are afraid to invest in that way?
Well, and it is interesting because I am thinking of a specific person when I made that comment. And that person is actually very generous, but has also saved much more than she needs. And I mean, in my job, I'm able to show them through various, you know, softwares and stuff, like the impact of that, and say like, hey, look, like if you took your nieces and nephews on a $50,000 vacation, like it wouldn't even make a dent in, you know, your ability to make it out to age 100. You know, so I'm able to show in a very practical way. But the interesting thing is that it's not like she's done it, right? So like I showed it to her, and I know she's very generous, and I know she loves her nieces and nephews. So I thought, well, you know, like let's look at this. Like, what would this do? Oh, look, it doesn't do anything to your trajectory. But she's still not quite willing to go there, you know. And so like that's part of my job as a financial planner coming from a Christian perspective, is to challenge people in that way, whether it's, you know, and sometimes that does look like challenging them around generosity, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. But I agree with you. I think fear is, and that can take a lot of different forms, but it's absolutely a massive negative force in all of this. Whether like I said, it's fear of missing out, or whether it's fear of loss, or whether it's fear of, you know, a lack of security, all of those different things. So it's definitely something we will dig into more in the next few weeks. Anyone else? I'd love to hear if you have specific topics over the next couple of weeks around finances that you'd like to make sure we talk about. If you want to mention those now or just write it on that paper, but I'd love to hear. Mm-hmm.
Well, this isn't a topic, but it's just like a thing I've been thinking about that. Like a question I heard was, are you living by an abundance mindset or a scarcity mindset?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just like for us, it's easy to put our security in money. Like if something goes wrong, we can just buy our way out of it.
Yeah.
And unlike in other worlds other countries where they're less, or just for people who don't have much, like then like the prayer, give us this day our daily bread, means a lot more to them when they're like looking to God for their needs.
Yeah, no, that's really good. The whole abundance and scarcity mindsets, I know it's a trendy topic these days, but I think there's actually a lot of wisdom to be had there, just in terms of understanding. And you certainly see it in the parable. I mean, it seems to be pretty clearly illustrated. The two who have, the two who are good stewards have an abundance mindset, right? They say, okay, he's given me this much. I'm going to go do something with this. I'm going to grow this. I'm going to make progress, as opposed to a sense of like, well, I could lose everything. I better tuck this away. So, yeah, no, that's really good. Did I see? Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear about how to balance like the here and now with saving for retirement. Like there's a lot of pressure to save for retirement, and like you can just do a really good job of that, but then like there are needs that happen day to day, and how you balance the two.
Yeah.
How do you prioritize like the now versus the future? Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, no, that's good. We'll definitely get into that a little bit. So really quick as we wrap up, what would you say to the person who's wondering, hey, how is Christian attitude towards finances, financial planning, all of that different from a secular one, who's not someone coming from inside the church? So you can't use the word stewardship because he doesn't know what that means.
It might start with like, it's not just about what I want. It's not just about my priorities, my values, independence.
Okay.
God has a say in my money, and it's not just about my impulses or what feels good to me.
Okay.
Or like money is a tool that serves my beliefs.
Okay.
And I think that's how I would phrase it to non-Christians, because people believe different.
Sure.
It'd be like,
yeah.
So.
Perhaps too, like the goal isn't to accumulate the most wealth for yourself. The goal is to love, serve, and obey God with His money as a manager, not an owner.
Mm-hmm. Huh?
All that we have is God's, and the money is actually God's, and when we give it, we're just giving back to God what He's given to us.
Anyone else? I said something along the lines, this was a few years ago, so I don't remember exactly what I said, but I said something along the lines of, well, we come at this from a foundational perspective of everything that I have is a gift to me, and it was given to me for a reason, so I need to try to figure out why it was given to me and then follow that path. So I said something along those lines. It was actually it was more difficult than I thought it was going to be, because of course, immediately I was like, well, we're stewards, not owners, and I'm like, no. I mean, but the interesting thing is, even saying that, the look on his face, I mean, he's a very like open-minded person, so it was kind of like, oh, okay, but it was a kind of a blank stare. I mean, it was just like, that's so weird, like, you're cool, so all right, I guess, but, so it was interesting. I thought, okay, this is a very foreign approach and mindset to someone who doesn't come from a faith background. So anyways, with that, I will let you guys go. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week, and we're going to dig into some practicalities. I've got some thoughts about various elements of finances that we're going to dig into you'll see some numbers besides numbers of verses on the screen, and we'll just go from there. So feel free to reach out if any other questions occur to you, to Blake or to me, that we can make sure we touch on. Thank you.